Welcome to App Planning for Success by Software Accelerator Playbook on Instagram at S.A.Playbook. Today on the podcast, we are talking all about relational databases and what they mean for you. Now, you don't need to understand the intricacies of a relational database in order to launch an app. This is the job of the developer to really get into the detail of what's happening with the relational database. But it is beneficial for you to know, generally, what they are, how they work, the benefit of them, and why we use them in app development. So to get started, what's a relational database? Well, at the beginning, it's going to be just a way for you to connect lots of different, spreadsheets together. And when I say spreadsheets, when I say databases, when I say tables, it's all kind of the same thing. It's data that is in columns and rows. That's really all it is. Now, we're giving it more of a structure. So if you created a spreadsheet where you need to track, the date of something and the amount of something and, maybe like a note, then you'd create, 3 columns. You'd create, the date and the note and the amount. And then you'd also probably have an extra column that's just, counting up, from 1, which number entry is it. So if you do that, then you're able to, look into that database and say, okay, now I want the amount for, columns 5 through 8. Or I want the amount, total from, this date to that date. And then the software can look inside of that spreadsheet and can basically find that information and be able to give you that information. So that's just one spreadsheet by itself. That starter spreadsheet where we just talked about, date and amount and a note, that's just one spreadsheet. But let's say that now you actually want to connect it to another spreadsheet. How do you connect it to another spreadsheet? What do you do? Well, very typically what you do is you create an extra column and you use that to store the entry number, the row number of a separate spreadsheet. So let's say that we've got a choice of maybe 3 t-shirt sizes, right? We've got small, medium, large. And, maybe we want that to be expandable, so we're going to just keep that information in a separate spreadsheet by itself, separate table by itself. So we will create that table. That's all it is called t-shirt sizes. And it has 3 entries, small, medium, large. Entry number 1 is small. Entry number 2 is medium. And entry number 3 is large. So now if we want to reach into this table and connect with this data, we can just call out to number 3. And number 3 is large. Now, we could, instead of creating this whole separate table for, t-shirt sizes, we could just write the information directly in the first spreadsheet. We could create another column that says, basically just, write the text of whether this person needs a small, medium, or large t-shirt. But what happens is when it gets more complicated than that, when it's not just, a small little piece of information, but maybe it's a collection of information, or maybe it's, a bunch of different things kind of coming together, there's a huge advantage in using a relational database where you're attaching spreadsheets together. And you're able to then call out from one spreadsheet to another one and say, hey, I need you to look for entry number 3. That's got the data that I need. So in this case, then you'd be putting an entry in that main spreadsheet with, date, amount, and a note. And then you'd have another column that would be reaching out to that t-shirt sizes spreadsheet and then saying whether it's going to be a 1, 2, or 3. A 1 is going to stand for the small, a 2 is going to stand for medium, and a 3 is going to stand for large. And when I say 1, 2, 3, what I mean is not just that we're kind of giving it a random numbering. We are actually letting the spreadsheet itself, count up from 1, and each new entry has a unique number. So if I create 5 entries, then I'll have 1 through 5. And those will never change. Now, if I delete some entries or if I add some new entries, that even if I create, 100 entries, but then I delete 95 of them, I'm going to have a unique number for those specific entries. So let's say that I add, from 1 to 100, I add a ton of different entries into the spreadsheet, and then I delete the first 95. The numbers that are left, I don't actually have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anymore. I have the numbers 96, 97, 98, 99, and 100. So those first 95 entries are gone, deleted, and with it, with that deletion of that data also comes that pointer, that row number, that what we call it is a primary key. Basically, the way to call out to that very specific row, that very specific entry, and say, I want this specific entry. We're not just saying, okay, there's 5 entries in this table, so we're just going to randomly give them numbers 1 through 5. No. Every time you add an entry to a table, it gets a new primary key. It gets a new entry number. Okay, so again, if you create 100 different entries in the t-shirt size table, right? Every single size 1, size 14 and a half, size 15 and a half, size whatever it is. You're creating 100 different entries, and then you're deleting the first 95 entries, even though you've only got 5 entries left. The primary keys will be 96, 97, 98, 99, and 100. So then when we're pointing to, entry 97 or entry 99, we know exactly what we're pointing at. Those relationships don't change. Once you put an entry into a table, it's going to stay locked there, and it's going to have that unique number attached to that row. It's going to have that unique number attached to that entry. So when we are then calling out to that table from one spreadsheet to another spreadsheet, trying to create a relational database, trying to basically connect 2 spreadsheets together, we call out to that unique number. We call out to that primary key. We call out to 99. We need 99 here. We're not calling out and saying, hey, we need the 4th entry here. No. We're calling out to the specific and exact primary key that had been created for us automatically. So all in all, what I want you to understand here is that when you're creating a relational database, you are connecting 2 spreadsheets together. At the bare minimum, you're creating one spreadsheet, and then in that spreadsheet you have a column where you are then putting in that column which entry from another spreadsheet you want to connect it to. So if you then have an entry with date, amount, and note, and you need to connect that to a specific t-shirt size, and the information for what t-shirt sizes there are is in a totally separate spreadsheet, then in that column we're going to put the number that corresponds to that other spreadsheet specifically for the entry we want to call out to. And then in the code, then we use the code to kind of put it all together. We can then, as we're putting the code together, we can then say, okay, pull the entry from the main spreadsheet, and then when you get to that one column where it's got that, entry 99 in this t-shirt table or entry 97 in the t-shirt table. Once we get to that part of the data, then we say, aha, what we want you to do with this number is not just show us the number. It doesn't help us if you just, print on the screen, entry 99. That does nothing for us. That's not helpful. What we want you to do with that number is take that number and then go over to the t-shirt size table and find entry 99 and then bring that over, and that's what I want to see. Okay? So ultimately, when you are making a relational database, you are connecting 2 separate spreadsheets together, and you're doing that by creating a column in one spreadsheet that holds the entry number of another spreadsheet. So that then in the code, then when we get down to the code level of, as we're actually building the thing and we're pulling that main entry, we know, aha, there's extra data kind of hidden in that column. We're not just trying to pull the exact number, entry 99 and print 99 on the page. No. We're trying to use that as information to be able to then go to a totally separate spreadsheet, that t-shirt size spreadsheet, and then pull entry 99 from over there and then bring it over. Now this can get really convoluted. I mean, you can have relational databases where everything is interlinked, right? I mean, you've got user tables that store, each different user on your site, right? So, user number 648 is a specific person, and they've got an email, and they've got a name, and they've got a node, and whatever else it is. So, if you log in as 648, user 648, then user 648 is going to have access to specific data. Now, how do we call out to the users table to entry 648? How do we connect all that? Well, let's just create a new spreadsheet in our mind. So wipe away what we did before. And right now we've got in our mind the idea of a users table where there is entry number 648, and that's a specific user. And then we've got a table of projects that this user has created and that other users have also created. So in this one table, there is all the projects that exist on the entire site. There's user number 1's projects, users number 2's project, user number 3's project, user number 4's projects. All of those different projects are in the same spreadsheet, in the same table. But if somebody logs in as user number 648, we do not want to show them data from any other user. So, in that projects spreadsheet table, we need to have a column that says which user owns this data. Which user number can we trust owns this data? Now, theoretically, you could put in something like, which email address owns this data, right? Instead of making it a relational database in terms of, calling out to like user number 648, you theoretically could put, this data belongs to bob@gmail.com. And then Bob creates, 100 different projects, and all of those say, that this, when you look at that table of projects, you can see there's a column where it says owned by, bob@gmail.com. But the problem is now, what happens if Bob wants to change his email? If we've baked that information into every one of those project entries, that's not actually helpful, because now we've made a duplication of data, and now if he needs to update his email, then we need to go back through and just update a whole bunch of stuff that we shouldn't need to update. But the better way is to have that users table, user number 648. And then there is where we store bob@gmail.com. And if Bob needs to update his email, well, then he just goes in, he changes his email, and then we have one place where that entry is changed, one place where that data is changed. And so now we change his email to be, bob2@gmail.com. And everything is still linked. Now, how come everything can still be linked if he changes his email? Well, we've connected all the data to his user ID. We didn't connect the data to his email, because that would be poor process and poor planning. We connected the data to his user number and his user ID, which he does not get access to change. He cannot change that. Now, if he makes a new account with a different email, then he'll have a new ID. But for as long as he uses the site, for as long as the database is alive, he will have that entry where he is user number 648. And now, anytime he makes a new project, we can just say, hey, this project belongs to user 648. And now if he changes his email every day, it doesn't matter, because we've connected it to the user ID and not to the user email. So you can see the advantage of this. When we get more and more convoluted and there's data all over the place, if we're tracking things and connecting things based on IDs, based on, the entry number, if you open up, a Google spreadsheet or whatever, you can see on the left side, there's entry 1, entry 2, entry 3, entry 4. It just counts up for you. Same thing with a database spreadsheet or a database table. Every time you create a new entry, it's going to just, drop a row in there, and it's going to give you a specific unique entry number, also called a primary key. If you're interested in learning more about that, Just search, database primary key, and you can learn all about it. But ultimately, a primary key is, the one identifier, the unique identifier for how we are pointing to one specific row, how we are calling out. It'd be just like if I was, looking over your shoulder. You had a long spreadsheet, and I said, "Hey, look at row 77," and then you know exactly what to do, right? You go to the spreadsheet, you go all the way down to row 77, and now you know the exact row that I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the primary key. Look at this specific row. Look at row 77. That's where the data is that you need. And then, if you create a new entry, then it's going to have a new unique number. So, in a Google spreadsheet, of course, you can have, empty rows, or you can kind of do whatever you want with the data because it's just kind of an open spreadsheet. But in a database, you're really structuring things properly where, each entry has to have, this type of data. And if you create a new entry, it'll just create a new unique number. It won't create a number that's already been created, right? So if you create 5 entries and then you delete them all and then you create a new entry, it's not going to create entry number 1. It's going to create entry number 6 because it's already seen 5 entries come through, and it wants to make sure that it's not going to be creating entries where there were entries before. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Now, this was a little bit more in depth than I initially planned on doing, but if you got this far, now you understand, different applications for why you might need a relational database. And it gets much more complicated when you're actually building, a production app. There's a lot of different tables that are talking to each other, because there can be, if you imagine it like hierarchy and nesting, if you're just thinking about like projects, right? So there could be like a project, which is kind of like the biggest holder. And then inside a project, there might be different elements. And there might be even multiple elements in the project. So let's say you have one project and you open the one project, but then it's got 10 elements inside it. And then inside of those 10 elements, there are sub-elements. So it's like we're kind of nesting this stuff. You remember those, have you ever played with those Russian dolls where they kind of, there's, one doll inside of another one, and you open up the big doll, and then there's a smaller doll inside of it, and then you open up that doll, and then there's a smaller doll inside of it, and you open up that doll, and there's a smaller doll inside of it. It's just like that for relational databases, where we can open up the big doll, which is, the project, and then once we open up that project, now we can see all the elements inside it, and now once we open up those elements, now we can see the sub-elements inside there. Right, so that's how that's the functionality of relational databasing, is that we can then connect things together very easily because we use, we're basically pointing from spreadsheet to spreadsheet by using these numbers, these primary keys, to point to specific rows and say, hey, I need that exact row. That exact row has the element inside it for project 7. Or, that row over there in the sub-elements spreadsheet has the data that I need for element over here. So you're basically just connecting things all together. You're connecting one spreadsheet to another spreadsheet, and within that, you're connecting that spreadsheet to another spreadsheet, and eventually then you get your whole picture of data while keeping things segmented and separated and organized, as opposed to just having one spreadsheet, one table that has, all these different rows and all this convoluted information, and everything is just kind of a mess. We can kind of keep our information together. If we have project data, well, we keep that in the projects table. If we've got element data, well, then we keep that in the elements table. If we've got users on the site, well, now we keep that in the users table. And so every single table kind of serves a purpose. And then we can use relational databasing, creating an extra column, to call out to a specific entry on a different spreadsheet. We use that functionality to be able to then connect these things together. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks for being here, and I will talk to you tomorrow.